Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last. Mothers and fathers.
If you think part 1 was good, wait until you hear part 2. This is How Can One Overcome Their Fear of Failure with Jeff Gargas and Noreen Daly.
Are you still fearing failure? Well, this is the conversation for you. We're going to give you some more ways how to overcome your fear of failure. So a lot of us, and I don't necessarily think this is cultural, but I just think you grow up, especially in an academic setting, hearing that you should avoid failure. What do you think then can be done? And I'm using that as an example, but it transcends other, aspects of our lives to say to people, failure is really not to be feared.
Yeah, so I'm gonna echo my co-founder Chad, who has always said, and I don't think he's the first to say it, but when you look at the word fail, the way we look at it when we talk about our teachers and then our teachers to their students, is that fail actually stands for your first attempt in learning. Your failure, and so when we talk about a student, right? They fail that test or they fail that quiz. That's not the end of their learning. It doesn't stop there, and it shouldn't stop there. That should just inform them of what they now need to learn and do and practice so that they can do better the next time. That's just their first attempt. So if you look at whatever you're trying to do in your life, whether it's start a business, whether it's get into a new relationship after, or coming out of a bad relationship, or getting in shape, or whatever it might be, or strengthening your faith, whatever you're looking to do, if the first time or second time, third time, fourth time, whatever, each time you're just attempting to learn more. And if you can take something, even if a really little bit of something, away from that quote unquote failure, in my opinion, it's not a failure, actually. It's just your first attempt to learn that, your first attempt to go at it. And as long as you keep going and you learn a little bit each time, then you haven't failed yet. I don't know who it is, but it's a comment. I don't know who to quote for this, but that you haven't truly failed until you stop trying. And that's true. And I think as long as you're taking those lessons away, then you can continue to go for that. So look for the little lessons, the little things that you learn, which, by the way, don't happen when you first figure out you failed. You gotta go through that moment first.
That's true.
Right. We talk about all the lessons we've learned from my past failures. I'm like, I didn't see them then. I see them now. When I reflect back, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that and I shouldn't have. So we shouldn't do that. Or I should have went this angle, or, those types of things. And when you're able to do that, then all those little failures along the way and the big failures become the lessons that help you now succeed in the future.
I don't know if you're a parent. Well, I believe you are.
What
do you think? Okay. What do you think, though, parents? Because everybody, you spend a lot of time at work and a time at school, but there's also the parental influence. What can you then say to parents? Because parents also have a role in playing in trying to counteract what then happens elsewhere. So what would you then say to parents to say, when you have these individuals under your charge, you also need to help them to recognize that failure is not to be feared?
I think two things. One is that you need to first make sure that you understand that for yourself, because you will accidentally project.
True.
Just like we sometimes don't realize, and one of our kids says something, you're like, where did you hear that? And you're like, oh, yeah, that was me. I just didn't realize that that's how I act sometimes just in your world. So it's the same thing when they see you make a mistake, fail, mess up, whatever, however big or small, how you react to that is how they're going to learn how to react to that. So you need to do that for yourself, which is going to be better for you anyway. And then hopefully they'll learn from that as well. And then I think really, and this goes for both you and them, and it's something we talk about, teachers talk about all the time, is get familiar with the power of the word yet. My daughter's currently working on trying to ride her bike, and she suffers some very, very severe anxiety and rational fears and things of that nature. So getting on the bike and potentially falling and stuff has been a really struggle, but she's been just working so hard at it for the last little bit here. And she's had multiple moments where she's kind of like had to jump off the bike, and she kind of like kicks it and says, I can't do this, Daddy. And I'm like, you can't do it yet. You can't do it yet. And I'm reminding myself too, I'm like, she can't do it yet. She's going to do this. And so I think teaching your kids, whether you use the word yet or not, teaching your kids the same thing, which is you haven't figured it out yet, but look how much better you did, or what did you learn from that? Maybe you, when you're falling off, don't jump, right? Don't lean. How do we do this? So I think, and that's hard to do, because you have to have a lot of patience with yourself, with them. But I think it really does come back to, if you can practice that and give yourself those things and remind yourself that it doesn't matter how old you are or how much you should or should not know. If you're trying to do something and you're struggling with it, you just haven't figured it out yet. And you got to pull away those lessons from each little attempt. And if you can model that for your kids and remind them that it's okay to struggle, and remind them that you struggled when you were younger. I think that's been a big thing with my kids that I never like thought about, which is like telling them, like, with her, like in her worries, I'm like, yeah, when I was a kid, my mom bought me like this worry rabbit thing, because I worried all the time too, even though daddy doesn't seem like he worries now. He does. I just, I have to be brave for you sometimes. And we talk, and that gets in, okay, well, sometimes she has to be brave for me, and it's worked really well of being open to her, but letting them know that we struggle with those things too.
Yes.
And I think that's one of my realizations. That I just turned 40, and I've been realizing that my dad had no idea what he was doing either. And it's been like this weird, and I don't know if that's just me who's just now realizing it, but like I'll do something with my kids, and I have this moment where I'm like, I remember like a similar situation with my dad, and I'm like, I wonder if my dad had no idea how to do this and had to Google it, and he didn't have Google.
Failure is not to be feared. We're going to continue this conversation right after a word from our partners.
Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.
So, the whole idea of a branding strategy sounded so exotic and so fancy to me. But after having several conversations with Neon, I now have a clearer understanding. I am sure of what my identity is, what it is that I want people to see Noreen Daly as. Thanks, Neon. Thanks, Splint.
Visit them at wearesplint.com.
Photography is an art, but more so, photography must come from the heart. Precious moments, priceless times. Take a pic and know it will turn out fine.
BMC Photography JA, beautiful moments captured. Let's go.
Langgo Language Institute was created to meet your language and communication needs. All of our packages were created just for you. We are passionate about language and dedicated to your success. We offer the CSEC English program, the Study Buddy program, the Get Ahead with English program, and the Business Communication program. Contact us at 767-285-0938 or email us at landolanguage@gmail.com, because the real question is, how can we help you?
Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.
Are you still fearing failure? Well, this is the conversation for you. We're going to give you some more ways how to overcome your fear of failure.
So I actually asked my dad, I'm like, so I was thinking about this time, and I can't remember what it was. I'm like, how did you do that? Because you didn't Google it, you didn't YouTube it. He goes, oh, I called your uncle. Like, he was my Google. I didn't know. Like, and I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense, because Uncle Tim was really good with that stuff and whatever. I'm like, so you didn't know what you were doing either? He goes, no. Like, why? How would we know? And I'm like, that's a good point. And so then I've thought to myself, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to tell them that. Like, hey, like, I don't know what I'm doing either. Like, you're being a kid for the first time. I'm a parent for the first time. We're figuring this out. And so I think doing that and just embedding in your kids that, like, if you fail once, it's not the end of everything. I've dropped out of college 4 times, failed out. Like, and now I run a team of 20 of people who all have multiple bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctorates. And I learn from them every day. They're all really smart. I don't know how I tricked them into working with me, but that's not the point. The point is,
really,
at any of those times, I could have just said, well, that's it, I'm done. I'll go over here, or I'll go do this. And I think it's really important that it's just your first attempt at learning. And then I think also it could be your second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, 20th, whatever. But I think you need to model that for your kids and talk to them about it and share when you're failing. I think that's huge. That's really important. And I think sometimes we think we're not supposed to do that because we're supposed to be the smart parent who knows how to do everything and shares everything. But some of the best things we can do for kids is to help them understand that we're going to learn it together so that they learn how to figure those things out.
Yeah. As we're wrapping up, you've said a lot, but if all of what you said, well, no, before I get to that, with all of what you said, how do you then think that if it is that we get to a point where people recognize that failure is not to be feared, how do you think all of that can then help us to have better relationships?
I think it's a good question. I think if we can figure out not how to get rid of fear, because that doesn't happen, but how to understand it and how to work with it, I think we can have more transparent and honest and vulnerable relationships with people, whether that's with our colleagues, our bosses, the people that we lead, our spouses, our other loved ones, our kids, whoever, our friends, that we are then going to better understand, allow them to better understand who we really are and who they really are. And if we're okay with the fact that that might lead to failures that can look a million different ways, like arguments or fights or whatever it is, that we're more likely to then strengthen all those things. The same with when you're working on something and learning, right? That first attempt at learning, if you continue to look at that as an opportunity to learn and grow on it, you'll get better at that. I think it's the same with relationships. If you're being honest with each other of the fact that we're both in this relationship, we're both learning together, we're both going to mess up. And if we do mess up, we need to use that as a learning opportunity to figure out why that happened so that we can have a strong relationship. I think that's how we strengthen that. And I think that leads to strong relationships, but then leads to better support systems, which then in my mind leads to more opportunities for us to have other successes outside of that relationship.
That's true. So I'm going back to what I started saying earlier. As we're wrapping up, and you've said a lot, if you could then describe all of what you just said in a 3-step process in terms of how can one overcome their fear of failure, what would that 3-step process be?
3-step. I think the first step is to work on who you are and understanding who you are and what's important to you and why you do the things that you do. The second step would be reflecting on all the times you feel like you failed or messed up or whatever it is, and find the lessons in those. It could be big, small, whatever. It may be really hard to find, but find those lessons. And I think for me, the third step is get into the habit of asking, what if, in the sense of I'm scared of that, whatever that is, but what if I did it? Like, what if it did happen? We often ask, what if I fail? What if I mess up? What if it doesn't work? Ask yourself the other way, which is, well, what if I didn't fail? What if it does work? What if it goes the way I want it to? What can happen then? And if you combine those together of understanding why you're doing things, understand how you've learned from other stuff, then when you ask the what if, you're more likely to actually be able to see that. Because the what if I fail is, well, then I get to learn more stuff. It might hurt. It might be embarrassing. It might be frustrating, whatever. But if I learn from that, then what if I continue trying and I do succeed that one time? And I think those are my 3 steps.
Yeah. That was my final question, though. But is there anything that you wanted to mention that you didn't get an opportunity? Any closing thoughts?
No, I think for me, the biggest thing is like anything that we've talked about and stuff, I think you just understand, if you're listening right now, that any of these things take a long time. It's not something that happens overnight. That's right. You're honestly going to mess up and fail at like trying these things. And these are things, honestly, as I look back, the record label, that failure happened, gosh, almost 15 years ago. And and it probably took me 10 or so to even learn that first piece. And so take your time with it, but take time to look back and reflect on what you've learned. I think that's important.
Yeah. They say time heals. Thank you so much for sharing, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yes. This was Making It Last podcast, where it's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, with other people. I'm Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life won't live making it last.